Hey, everybody, welcome to the ReCoop. I'm Cooper Daniels, and I'm a guy that knows a little about a lot. And today I am here with Natalie Brunell. She is the host of a popular Bitcoin podcast, Coin Stories. She's an accomplished journalist and an overall Bitcoin advocate, right? Did I get that right, Natalie?
Yes, thank you. You actually stole my former line from my resume. I know a little about a lot because as a reporter, I had to cover a lot, and I never knew
Did
about
you
one thing too in depth until Bitcoin.
are you serious? Did you really used to say you know a little about a lot? No.
Well, I didn't have it on my resume, but yes, I used to say that. I was like,
Right.
I had to become an expert for a day on all these different topics when I was a news reporter, but I was never actually the expert. But yeah, it was a fun career.
Yeah, I mean, I'm wondering how long I can do this and how much I can learn and still pull off that line. But I still feel like I'm okay. And we're talking about Bitcoin today, so I have a feeling that I have some things to learn from you. So, look, thank you so much for joining me. I know, I'm following you on Twitter, and I saw earlier this week you're talking to Michael Saylor. Last night, you're on the most watched cable news primetime television show. And then today, you're on the ReCoop. So you're really climbing that ladder, Natalie.
Yes,
Like, I
I
have
know.
to
Thank
say,
you for having me. I'm
of
honored. I
course.
wore my Bitcoin orange, so I'm ready to
Yeah.
go.
Yeah, you are. So, I mean, I'm obviously joking, but that's okay. So, okay, before we start, like, why don't we just get, in case somebody doesn't know who you are out there, like, let them know who you are and, a little bit about your past and how you came to Bitcoin and, how you got here.
Sure. Yeah. I'm actually very new to the Bitcoin space in terms of being in the public eye. My background is media. I was a television journalist for more than 10 years. I covered everything. I was a breaking news correspondent for ABC, traveling the country. I've done local markets where I was an investigative reporter and anchor. And it was really a fascinating career. It's what I always wanted to do from the time I was very young. And,
Hmm.
taking it back to like when I was little, I think one of the reasons why I became so passionate about Bitcoin is because I know from a very young age what it means to financially struggle. My parents came here, first generation from Eastern Europe. They wanted to flee communism. They grew up under
Hmm.
communism where there was no sense of upward mobility and really making a life for yourself in the same way that the American dream sort of represented. So they really wanted to come here. It's very difficult to immigrate from Eastern Europe. It took them many, many years. So they didn't come until my mom was in her late 30s. My dad was in his early 40s, and they started from scratch. Like, I really
Wow.
admire them so much. And I'm really close to my parents because I just watched them sacrifice and work so hard just to give their kids a better life here. And so I was always just instilled with this sense of you have to work hard. I have to do well at school. Like, I'm basically the person who's going to make it or break it for my family because I was so little when I got to come. So
Hmm.
I put a lot of pressure on myself. I think it's like led me to be like the kind of, I hustle and I'm very ambitious because I really
Hmm.
want to justify the sacrifice my parents made. They worked really, really hard. They held down multiple jobs. They were trying to learn the language. And then when the financial crisis hit, we had just a couple years prior to that, had been able to afford our first home in the United States. They had a down payment, they got a mortgage, and this is the time everyone was like, everyone get a house and we're going to make it really cheap for everyone to own a house. And then boom, the financial bubble popped and my family lost everything. Like just as they had taken off, they crash landed. And it was so
Wow.
sad to see them file for bankruptcy. And I was graduating college at the time. And I had this feeling where, like, this is America. Like, all these big banks are getting bailed out, these big corporations. No one at the top who caused all this is losing their job, but my parents are one of the 10 million people who lose their homes and like have to start over. So, I had chosen journalism and I entered into the journalism career with sort of this fire planted in me where I was frustrated and I felt like the system's unfair and I want to call out the people who are powerful and hold them accountable, especially for things
Hmm.
like this. So I did a really traditional news path. I started really small and I always like gravitated toward investigative and like public corruption style stories where I just really, held their feet to the fire. And then in 2017 I discovered Bitcoin.
Hmm.
I didn't understand it like so many people. So I relate to everyone in the audience that's like, I don't believe in this. It's a scam. It's digital, whatever. I had to really put in the work to understand it. And then I really, really studied it. And what I realized, to kind of finish this long-winded thought, is I realized that all the problems that not only my family had suffered and experienced, but also all the things I had been documenting as a journalist, the growth
Mm-hmm.
in corruption, the growth in poverty, growth in homelessness, rising cost of everything around you. Everything was connected to how broken our financial system is and this thing called money printing that I never really understood. And
Mm-hmm.
Bitcoin was really designed to address all these things. So I suddenly became really passionate. And it was, that saying, like, when preparation meets opportunity, that's luck. It's not really luck.
Yep.
It's like a lot of different elements. I felt like that's what happened to me because I was prepared in terms of 10 years of communicating messages, storytelling, writing, going on camera, communicating
Yeah.
essentially. And then I learned about Bitcoin. I put in the work. I prepared myself for that as well. And then the opportunity came where, I entered this space and there weren't a lot of women talking about it in the media. And now I basically created a new career, which is 10 times more fulfilling, where I get to talk about Bitcoin on my podcast and on television.
That's amazing. So, okay. So you started, so you around 5 years old, you move from Eastern
Yes.
Europe. Your
Mm-hmm.
family has to restart at their 40s, which I mean, I think a
Yeah.
lot of people out there probably even, identify with now. Like there's a lot of
Yeah.
people being like, wow, I just got a ton of college debt and it really
Mm-hmm.
didn't serve me for anything. And people are constantly reinventing themselves. And
Yeah.
so that's amazing that they pulled that off. They get the house, and then 2008 happens. It crashes, which was also the catalyst, I believe, for Bitcoin in general, right? I mean, that's what
Yeah.
whoever Satoshi is. I mean, maybe
Yeah.
I'll make you guess that later, but but so that's amazing. So then, when did you finally when did Bitcoin finally come on your radar?
Yeah, it was 2017. I was working as a reporter at NBC based out of the capital of California.
Hmm.
And so I was doing a lot of, government stories, and I met a lot of people who lived in Silicon Valley or worked in Silicon Valley, and they just started talking about Coinbase and Bitcoin and crypto. And I'm like, what is this thing? So I learned very little about it at first. I
Hmm.
equated it to essentially stocks, and
Yeah.
I thought that any money that I could put in, I would probably lose. So I invested very little to start, but I pat myself on the back. Like, I actually invested. I
Yeah.
opened up my first Coinbase account, and I was like, I'm going to try this thing. What are these people talking about? And I pitched a story. I remember doing a story on Bitcoin in about 2017. And it was about a Bitcoin ATM that was in a local mall outside of Sacramento. And my
Hmm.
station, I remember, there was pushback. There's a lot of pushback in mainstream media that I was up against because they really don't understand it. I don't think a lot of reporters and producers, I'm just gonna say it and be truthful. I really I don't think they understand our financial system, especially like mainstream regular news markets where it's not financial, focused. They really
Right.
don't understand the money printer, inflation, things like that. And I was one of those people.
Yeah.
It took me actually 2 years to fully understand Bitcoin because the Bitcoin standard was really what changed everything for me. I had a mentor who I told him I bought Bitcoin, and he didn't know what it was. And so he went out and purchased the book, The Bitcoin Standard, and he read it and said, Natalie, you have to read this book. Like, you bought something that could potentially be life-changing. You need to read this. So I read the book, and for me, it was it's like a, have you ever seen that movie Inside Out, or Inside Out? Is it Pixar?
Oh
Core
yeah.
memories.
Yeah.
You know how it
Yeah.
creates core, like it like gets released in your brain. Literally,
Yeah.
like a core memory was made when I read the Bitcoin Standard,
Oh,
because it
good for
was
you.
like this aha moment of like, oh my gosh, this is why the financial crisis happened. This is why my parents lost everything. This is why
Yeah.
I've been like reporting on all this stuff. And it was
Yeah.
just, I read it twice. And then literally it was like, I was so hungry. It was like I needed to learn everything I could. I started studying macroeconomics, Bitcoin, the technology. I read every book I could. I watched every podcast and YouTube video and really studied. I took the time to really study, and then I was able to start to put my thoughts out there as well.
That's amazing. So now you have a podcast. How long have you been doing coin stories?
So I launched my first episode of Coin Stories at the Bitcoin conference last year because I decided to go just to network, try to get more guests, meet some of the people that I had interviewed that were kind enough to talk to me when they had no clue who I was and I had no podcast. And I
Right.
brought my best friend. So I launched it June of last year with like 2,000 Twitter followers.
Oh, wow, good for you. And so,
Yeah.
okay, so this is new. This isn't actually you
Yeah.
this like you said, this is relatively new. So,
Yeah.
okay, so you learn about Bitcoin in 2017. You have the courage to actually put your money where your
Hmm.
idea is or where and then you follow that and then you continue down the journalist path. But
Hmm.
then last year or you said 2020 or 2021, sorry.
Last year, the first conference that I
Yeah,
attended was last
the
year.
first
Yeah.
one. Yeah. And so and then you're like I'm going to start a podcast where called Coin Stories. And in
Hmm.
Coin Stories, you're talking to different people, notable figures in the Bitcoin community and you're making them actually tell you their story rather
Hmm.
than, it's not just like a Bitcoin conversation. It's like, okay, I want to know more about you. That and it's so evident, right? I mean, and you do that and it's exciting to listen to. So storytelling and like I'm also really attracted to that type of thing. It makes me feel like you have like an acting background as well when I listen to you. Do you or no? Am I reaching here?
Oh, that's funny. Well, so when I was young, I knew I wanted to work in media, because
Hmm.
I probably mentioned I wanted to be in that world ever since I was little. And the reason is because we watched a ton of news and movies and TV shows when I was little because it helped my parents learn English and it helped, I guess, me
Hmm.
learn English too, but it was easier for me to pick up. And so there was a time, like I took acting classes. Like I loved being on stage and like I loved being
Hmm.
in front of the camera. So I did take acting classes for a little bit, but I ended up pursuing
Yeah.
journalism. But what's funny about what you mentioned is I've always been attracted to like biographies or autobiographies, people's stories, especially if they were rags to riches. Because I always felt it was
Yeah.
inspiring when people overcame obstacles. And that was probably because, I was coming from the rags side. Like I just, I
Right.
wanted to know that it was possible to achieve whatever, even if you didn't come from, connected parents or a certain status. And
Yeah.
so I actually I would follow those types of stories. I would Google people's backgrounds always. And there was a podcast I loved called How I Built This with Guy Raz. And he
Oh yeah.
interviews like CEOs. It's one of the most popular shows from NPR. He interviews CEOs of companies like Southwest or Spanx about their whole story. Like, how did they build the company? How did they achieve success? Many of them came from humble backgrounds. And so actually it was in 2018 I started a different podcast because I hadn't studied Bitcoin yet, and it was called Career Stories, where I just talked to people within the media, like
Hmm.
journalists, TV producers, social media influencers, like how did you build your career? And then when I learned about Bitcoin, I basically decided to just pivot that podcast to Coin Stories because as I learned about Bitcoin, I started following all these really big voices, Anthony Pompliano, Michael Saylor, Plan B, all these big names that are really popular in the space. But I,
Hmm.
I was like, who are they? Like, where did they
Yeah.
come from? How did they learn about Bitcoin? Why do they believe in Bitcoin? How did they build their careers? So I didn't find that information anywhere. I didn't have that like human interest angle to it. And I think you always connect with someone more when you know their story and you know their background. So that was the genesis of Coin Stories. I didn't even think that it was going to be my career. I just did it as a side project while I was still working as a reporter. I was a full-time reporter and I did the podcast for fun. And then the
Hmm.
audience took off. I had opportunities to sort of monetize it and leave my job, which I ran with because I was like, I'd rather talk about Bitcoin.
So, I mean, exactly. And also, like, the Bitcoin space is filled with such drastic examples of what you're talking about. Somebody that was struggling and they either stumbled
Yeah.
upon this or they learned about this and it transformed so many lives to,
Yeah.
there's a lot, I'm sure there's a lot of rags to riches stories in the Bitcoin
Yeah.
community. Okay. So, you talked about, well, by the way, did your parents recover after losing the house in 2008? Is everything, did they get back on their feet and everything okay? Or
So they were finally able to purchase another house, a little bit smaller than the one that we had when I was in high school, about 2 years ago. And there's like
okay.
it's a struggle. It's hard when you have to start over at that age, like when you should basically be thinking about retirement. It's hard.
Yeah.
So I do like I really like people ask me, what like you're like out there. I'm like, yeah, I have a fire in me. I'm going to spread this word because it's not fair that our financial system basically is rigged against the average working person and favors
Hmm.
the people at the top and basically just it like short circuits capitalism in my opinion. It doesn't allow for what's naturally supposed to happen in free markets, which is the punishment of risk and the reward for risk. We don't punish risk. We have no consequences. Like, you could basically be an irresponsible bank and hurt a ton of customers, take too much risk, and then you just get bailed out, because that's what the federal government does. They swoop in and they save these big companies, they money print and offer them easy money, and everyone else is like struggling to pay for groceries, struggling to pay for their kids' education. Like, that's not the American dream to me that my parents came here for. And like, if I can be on this mission to at least shine a spotlight on it, I will do anything I can to do that.
Yeah. I know it's sad when you see, obviously it's devastating what happened to everybody that was invested in Terra Luna this week, but
Yeah.
it's also troubling to me when I see on Twitter a bunch of people being like, oh, they'll never let it fail. They're going to bail it out, buy more Luna, which has got to be the worst thing you can do. But it's, that sentiment is so ingrained in people that like Terra Luna for some reason is too big to fail. Like, no, it's not. Actually, it's better if it goes away, not to the poor people that have been devastated by, those imposters. But okay, moving on from that. So here we are today, right? So 2008 happened, and it seems like we just can't kind of figure it out, right? I mean, we're in a we're in a tragedy today as well. I mean, it's mixed with, I'm sure you are, more intimately aware of this than I am, but what's happening in Eastern Europe and, Russia and everything. And so there's just this mixture of what is going on, and our markets are, I think the SP 500 is not performing well. Let's just put it that way for, this year. And what are you, they say fix the money, fix the world, right? That's the Bitcoin mantra. It's been ever since I've been in it, and I'm a supporter of Bitcoin. I know if you paid any attention to my channel, if you looked, you're like, oh God, is this guy just like some altcoin maxi? Like, what am I getting into? I don't know if those were your thoughts or not, but I'm often, I'm a supporter of Bitcoin, and I have been for a long time. So what are your thoughts about right now and what Bitcoin can do? Because I'm sorry that I'm droning on, but one thing that has been troubling for me in Bitcoin is, these like a futures ETF. It seems like they're bringing the manipulation of the stock market over to the Bitcoin market on some level. So what are your thoughts on all of that?
Sure. So I definitely was concerned when they approved the futures ETF as opposed to the spot ETF. And, the futures creates basically synthetic versions. There's now no limit on the supply of Bitcoin, essentially. And on the margins, I think it can swing the price with Wall Street betting one way or another. So no, I wasn't happy with that. But at the same time, I really am hopeful about a spot ETF. We just saw one approved earlier this week in Australia. There's been precedent set in other countries. And I know that there's a really big push right now, and you can even make your voice heard for converting the grayscale into the first spot ETF. That application is in process. They've been meeting with the SEC. I think that some of the early talks about that have been very, very bullish. And I think that will really help with Bitcoin's price discovery and help with encouraging institutional adoption, because it will offer, one more on-ramp for people to invest in things, pension funds investing and things like that. So I'm bullish on it. It's frustrating that it hasn't been approved. And honestly, I have a lot of questions about why, because we have at the head of the SEC, Gary Gensler. And I don't know if anyone in your audience, has followed him, knows anything about him, but I highly recommend, if anyone's interested in crypto at all, to Google, YouTube, Gary Gensler's MIT lecture on blockchain and Bitcoin. It's about 24 hours worth of content. And he literally teaches this class the entire computer science and programming behind Bitcoin. He knows literally more than I think the majority of Bitcoiners. He can explain hash functions and digital signatures and SHA-256. He literally knows it forwards and backwards. And he did that lecture back in, I think, 2018, when the price of Bitcoin was like 6,500. So this guy understands Bitcoin, like he knows it. I think he understands the power of it. I think he also understands what America's competitive advantage would be. So I'm really confused why he would approve a futures ETF. I would argue is a bigger risk for investors than the spot ETF, unless unless they know that that's going to just shoot the price up and they're not ready for that or something. But it's been interesting to follow that, and I do think we will see a spot ETF. And the last thing I'll say is just, I know that this week has been really hard for a lot of people. It's hard to stomach the volatility. A lot of us were expecting Bitcoin to go higher before it, maybe dipped down. Maybe people didn't expect it to draw down this much. I'm certainly one of those people that has been expecting some kind of a crash within this year, potentially next, because we keep kicking the can down the road and inflating a bubble that's bigger and bigger and bigger. And the music has to stop eventually. And we have a history of patterns, whether it's the dot-com bubble bust and the financial crisis bust, and we had the pandemic bust. All of this had to come crashing down at some point. And I knew that would take a big hit on Bitcoin, but I thought that Bitcoin would have gone even higher first, so that like when it comes down, it's a little, the floor is a little bit higher. But look, this kind of had to happen. I mean, I mentioned it when I went on Tucker's show. It's like we've been printing so much money, we've inflated all of this, and now it's hitting people where it hurts. Inflation is skyrocketing. It's at 40-year highs, and they had to take it seriously. They had to take it very, very seriously, and they had to allow the equities to come down, and they're trying to do inflation into a slowing economy. But look, they also have an election coming up. There's an election in a couple of months. So I think what my best guess that's going to happen is equities could come down even further. Crypto could come down even further, but they're going to, inflation will turn, they will declare victory, and then the money printer is going to initiate again, because the only way that our country can service its debt and finance itself is through money printing. And that's what's really sad. That's something I didn't understand really before Bitcoin, but we have to keep printing to keep this thing going. It's now a steamroller that cannot be stopped, and money printing does always benefit Bitcoin. So I hope there's a future that, where equities and Bitcoin decouple and it's not so correlated. And I think we're, still a little bit ways away, but ultimately I think more short-term pain, and then in the long run, Bitcoin will be the winner.
Yeah, I mean, and money printing definitely to service debt, but it also helps win elections. You got to print the money, you got to give the money to the people so they'll vote for you, right? You got to pay for these votes. So that's another thing. So we have Do Kwon, right, from Terra Luna. I'm going to bring that up one more time, and that's a huge collapse. And he was also in the process of buying, he was seeking to get about $10 billion worth of Bitcoin. I think he got up to 3 or 1.5. I don't know if it was 1.5 or 3.
I thought he was up to 4 actually, but
so he got up to 4. Yeah. And you interviewed Michael Saylor earlier this week, and obviously MicroStrategy owns an intense amount of Bitcoin as well. I mean, I will say that Bitcoin is held up pretty good around 30. Like, it doesn't want to go much lower than that. It did, but it's wanting to live there. So there is strength there. But and I don't know what Terra Luna has done with their Bitcoin. Have they dumped it? I mean, do we know? Have we seen that on chain?
That's a really good question. I do know that one of the wallets that held Bitcoin was emptied at some point. I think they were trying to sell, and I do think that impacted volatility because it was selling into such an illiquid market. I don't know. But I don't know if they still have Bitcoin or what. But it's such a mess. It's such a mess. I really feel for people that lost money, but it's such a mess.
Right. And then are you concerned about, Michael Saylor, for example? Like MicroStrategy, he owns so much of it. He's one of the faces of Bitcoin, and he communicates it beautifully, but he also has a track record in the dot-com bubble. And, he's, I don't know, is there any concern there for you in Bitcoin, or I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't have a concern. I think that he knew the risk that his company was taking, and he really sees this as a long-term strategy. And that's one that he's made clear to both his team, his board members, his shareholders. I mean, if you're purchasing MicroStrategy, you know that they're really betting long-term on Bitcoin. And, for sure, when the price drags down, he said on my podcast, he's like, I didn't expect it. He was buying coins all the way in the 50s. A lot of those loan payments are not due for several years. And I'm curious to see what happens to Bitcoin's price. He clarified on my show the headlines and claims out there about a $21,000 margin call. He said that's not true. And so, I think it'll be interesting. We do have, these bigger players that are coming in, and it is really good for the space in the sense that it does encourage more adoption. These big, I think when MicroStrategy went in, it really moved the price. And as Bitcoin grows and as the market cap grows, I think that companies may have a little bit less impact individually. But at this point, the Teslas coming in and the Square blocks, they still they're market movers, and it's important. That's why people are watching them. But ultimately, I think that Michael Saylor hits on the most important point, which is that this is the long-term strategy, so that you don't get poor slowly with inflation just bleeding you out. I mean, one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about Bitcoin is because what's sad to me is that in this country, we've gone from a place that, first of all, was the world's largest creditor nation at one point. Now it's the world's largest debtor nation. Everyone is literally in like negative account balances when you talk about school loans, mortgages. So we literally have just nationalized and normalized debt, being constantly in debt and taking out credit for everything. We don't save, which is the heart of capitalism, is like it's having the capital that you save to invest in something, to create, to build, to grow. And we're not growing. We're basically, I think we have a lot of imaginary fluff wealth in this country that's pooling at the top. One of the statistics that I found most fascinating is that 5% of the population holds 2/3 of the country's wealth. So everyone else is basically fighting for the other third. And so we've gotten to a place where now you can't just put your money in the bank in order to save and plan for your future. You have to turn your house into a savings account, and that is appreciating to levels that are completely unsustainable. And like, oh great, okay, so your house went up 20%. Well, now you're going to sell that and you have to buy another house that went up 20%. Like, who's the winner really, here, right?
Yeah.
The real estate agents, I guess.
The middleman. Yeah, the middleman. Exactly.
And then before, in the 90s, we transitioned into this like 60-40 stock and bond portfolio. Now bonds are at negative real yields as the result of inflation. Stocks carry a lot of risk. You have to become a portfolio manager or hire one to try to figure out which companies, this earnings report, this valuation. Like, it's turned into like a system that is, it sucks for the average person. You have to worry about making your money first, and then worry about maintaining the value or trying to, make a profit on it. And that's like another full-time job, it feels like. And so my passion for Bitcoin is the idea that maybe we can create or return to a system where the money is scarce and finite, and the supply can't be manipulated or expanded, so that in theory your money should go up in value every single year, and you can purchase more things, and you can save for the future and plan for your family. Because right now, I think, when you look at the purchasing power of the dollar, the fact that it's declined like 95% since the Federal Reserve was created in 1914, that has a real impact on people's lives. And in the reverse, we've had asset bubbles created where the price of assets is just astronomical and most people don't hold assets. And so I would just like to see a more fair system that's more inclusive and has more economic opportunity overall.
Right. Yeah, I mean, the way I've sort of seen, I mean, you brought up Gary Gensler, and that brings me to another point, because I do find him to be actually very bullish on Bitcoin specifically. If you read into what he says, it sounds like, okay, Bitcoin's going to be okay as long as he's the head of the SEC.
I
But,
think so.
But crypto is going to struggle because there's going to be a security label to that, and that's going to get overly regulated, and we're going to see so many things die because of that. Because once they're not allowed to play recklessly like a Terra Luna, then there's going to be a lot of things falling off the league. I feel like we're in kind of dying season right now. You saw it in Luna. And then, I had a buddy recently be like, hey, is this a good time to buy Shiba? And I'm like, just don't buy Shiba. I usually let people do what they want to do. But I'm just like, would you not think about things like Shiba? I have and I'd like to hear your thoughts on it. I might have a little more of a wider view of what's available and what's good, but because I see Bitcoin as fixing the money, right? And then I see some of these layer one protocols as fixing the banks in some level, giving opportunity to people, to a small time guy to use DeFi. You're getting interest rates and yield that only multimillionaires get in the banking system. There's so much more opportunity for people to put their money to work in DeFi. Now, obviously, there's a lot of risk, and there will there'll be regulatory risk. But I'm curious on what you think about, Bitcoin versus, I guess, crypto would be the way to put that.
Yeah, so I am a huge believer in free markets, and I always say, invest based on your own risk tolerance, and I wish everybody luck. For me, I started out trying to dabble in different things because, to be honest with you, I did it for the same reason as most people, because you think, oh, well, I could get a lot of this coin for very little, and if it takes off, it's a
I'm gonna
lottery
be
ticket.
rich.
But at the end of the day, what am I? If I'm being honest, like, I'm just essentially gambling, and I'm taking a
Yeah.
lot more risk. And I urge people caution, because you're right. I mean, these are unregulated securities. And so when regulation does come in and the hammer kind of comes down, there may be some things that completely fail. And I think that, investing in crypto at large requires a lot more research in terms of who are these companies? What is the money that's backing it? Is this a scheme where, venture capital is coming in to try to get big profits, and then they're going to exit and everyone else is going to be holding the bag? There are, versions of Ponzi schemes. And I just think that people should be very, very, very careful. The Luna Terra situation, this is, I would say, the most capitalistic free market industry that exists right now because of the lack of regulations. And that means that things will fail and there is no backstop. There's no mama bear coming in to save the day. There's no Fed that's going to bail you out. You're just kind of stuck. And I literally have heard stories. I don't know if they're true or not, because, you never know with Twitter, but people saying, like, I put in this much and now I have like 5 cents in my account for Luna Terra. There's a lot of experimentation going on. Some of those experiments will go on to, I think, be successful. I do believe that we're going to live in a place where there's like the metaverse and all that. But I want people to remember the .com bubble in the 90s, because we had tons of companies. Anyone could create a website. Anyone today can create a cryptocurrency, and they shoot up in value. And all of a sudden, like when things unwind, like we're seeing right now, things can go to literally zero. They could become worthless. You never hear from them again. And other things, even very successful companies in the .com bubble, Amazon went down 90%, got a haircut for about a decade, and went on to become the biggest retailer in the entire world. So there will be some other things that I think are successful projects. But you mentioned like getting the kind of gains that only banks or whatever see. I really believe I'll get that with Bitcoin. Like I want to have a money that is hard, that is fixed, that I know can be my savings technology and savings account. And I have to look at the price every day because of my job. But like, if I was the average person who was working as like a doctor or an actress or whatever, I would put a certain amount of money in that was like for my future, for 4, 5, 10 years from now. And I would just like put it there and not look at it. And that's how I see Bitcoin. So I don't invest in the rest of the space.
So you don't. Yeah. And I want to push back just a little bit on the unregulated securities on some of these things, because I mean, and maybe you can clarify, a security means that you have equity in a company, right? Like, so in order for one of these tokens to really be a security, I would think would be I own a portion of that company. No?
So securities, basically they do the Howey test. And so I have to look up the 4 things because it's really I'll just say the 4 things because it really helps you understand. Basically, the big takeaway, let's just like zoom out for a second. If there's like a centralized group that can control which direction that token goes, that's one sign. And number 2, if there is a seeking of profit, essentially, which you could say technically for Bitcoin, but like there's a group behind it, or a group of people, or a certain entity behind it, and there's an expectation of profit. So the 4 things for the Howey test, which basically make all these other cryptocurrency securities, is there's an investment of money, there's an expectation of profits from the investment of money is in a common enterprise, and any profit comes from the efforts of a promoter or third party. So it is a little bit different, because, and I want to highlight what happened with Luna Terra, right? When all this stuff went down, everyone is flocking to a dude's Twitter account to be like, what's going to happen? Are you going to expand the supply? Are you going to repeg it? Da-da-da. Guess what? Like, there is no CEO of Bitcoin. There's no Bitcoin page that you could go to be like, are they going to reinflate it?
There's no,
you're dependent on people that can change it. They can fork it. They can expand the supply. They can burn tokens. They can do whatever they want. They can leave tomorrow and some other guy takes over. So I am totally a believer. Do what you want with your money. Like, don't harm other people. Do what you want. But I don't dabble in that space because of that.
Yeah. I mean, it does seem like if you can just shut it down and turn it back on, I mean, that's kind of
Yeah.
ridiculous.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, they
I
shut down Terra
know.
Luna. I mean, this happens to Solana weekly. So
Yes.
there's some interesting stuff out there. I happen to, and we don't, this isn't you interviewing me, so I don't have to go into Algorand too much, but I happen to believe that Algorand solves a lot of these problems that you're talking about. But,
Okay.
there's still a foundation and there's still, certain permissions for a certain type of node. So I get it. I get it. I
Yeah.
get, especially from the Bitcoiners perspective. So let's as we kind of wrap up, or I don't know, I don't need to wrap up, but as we there's certain things that I hear about Bitcoin, like I mentioned it earlier, you fix the money, you fix the world. It's
Mhm.
digital property.
Mhm.
It's the only sound money, really, because like you
Mhm.
were kind of touching on earlier, fiat and everything else is basically just credit. We're on a credit
Yes.
system because that's the only real reason
Yes.
why it's worth anything. Is a we
Yes.
agree it's worth anything and people owe it. And
Yes.
so with Bitcoin, obviously it's capped. There's 21 million. There'll never be more than 21 million. So why don't you explain to me a little bit, like, what do you mean by Bitcoin is digital property?
Yeah. So, I mean, just in the same way that kind of you think of estate, I mean, this is plots, I don't know, digital real estate in cyberspace.
Mm.
Essentially, you are making a claim to a fraction or an entire Bitcoin, and there's only ever going to be 21 million. So it's not like what you mentioned with paper currency that right now they can print an infinite amount of, and it's not backed by anything. So, before I understand, one of the best books is the Fiat Standard, which really breaks down the history of our currency, especially in this country, and how we moved from the gold standard to a fiat standard. But at one point, we had our paper money that was backed by gold. And it made sense because gold is hard to move around, right? So they made paper claims on it and the banks would issue them. And then all of a sudden, there were issues with different banks having different notes. And they created a Federal Reserve, which is essentially like a cartel for the banks. It doesn't work for the people, it works for the banks. Um, and so and then we depegged. We said we're no longer going to be on the gold standard back in the 70s, and there's a lot of history that has to do with that. And so now they're just printing money that, like you mentioned, it's a system of credit. We are so far into debt, and in such a to such an extent that we will never be able to pay it back, unfortunately.
Mhm.
And we have nothing that is finite in terms of the supply, nothing that's difficult to expand that backs up the currency. It's just the faith in the government, and we have a powerful military, pretty much it. They can print however much they want. And so I see an issue with that. And even when we had gold, which was, I think, the best hard money we had prior to Bitcoin, the supply can only be increased or inflated at a rate of about 1% to 2% every single year. It's very difficult to mine gold. We don't even know how much actually exists in the Earth's crust. A lot of it has already been centralized. And so it's in reserves of banks, and it's controlled, by the people that we want to take the money away from, the control of money away
Yeah.
from. And so there's just a lot of complications with going back to something like the gold standard. But when we had a gold standard, there was some, there was a measure of just like, what's the word? Like, the government couldn't just get away with basically spending however much they want in order to get the
Yeah.
votes, like you mentioned. Like, oh yeah, if you elect me, I'm
Yeah.
going to pay for your this, and this. Well, they would have to actually generate that money in the form of taxes, or they would have
Right.
to borrow and actually try to pay it back. And now
Yeah.
we're in a system where it's like 300% debt to GDP. I mean,
Yeah.
it's crazy. And so
Yeah.
when it's created, Satoshi Nakamoto programmed it so that it would be what's called a disinflationary policy. It's not a deflationary policy, because it's not that less and less are, coming into circulation. It's actually, we're seeing more come into circulation every year as they're being mined, but it's less and less every 4 years. He has those like halving cycles. So every 4 years, the amount coming into circulation is less until basically there's none in the year 2140. So none of us will be around. It was meant to be scarce, and it was meant to take away the centralization and the control of money by central authorities. And I just like the idea of that, because, if you look at other monies or look at other precious metals, palladium, if you look at gold, the stock to flow model, which I know is broken in Bitcoin, the stock to flow model kind of measures like how much something goes up in value based on how difficult it is to produce it. And so as things become increasingly difficult to produce, or there's a certain level by which you can cap inflation, the monetary value tends to go up, especially as the money's value is diluted. And so we've really seen that with Bitcoin as the price, like with halvings as they happen. Traditionally, it coincides with a massive spike in the price because fewer and fewer now are coming into circulation. And so, again, there will only be these like 21 million plots of digital real estate when it comes to Bitcoin. You can own a tiny bit of one, you can own multiple, but that's
Right.
it. Like once they're mined, it's 21 million. And I'm sure a lot of them have been lost. People have lost their keys, they've lost their coins. So that I think makes the supply even smaller. And I want
Right.
to own something that is scarce. It's like owning scarce art
Yeah.
or scarce real estate, you know? So that's
Yeah.
kind of what I mean by digital property.
Right. And I mean, and just kind of going back, like I went to a wedding recently with some very like traditional, very wealthy people that are in the bank, just in the industry. And
Yeah.
I happen to be one of the more popular people because they're like, well, should I buy this ETF? Like people are definitely smart money is starting to be like, all right, wait a second. I don't want to,
Yeah.
they're getting FOMO. And I'm like, no, you don't buy the ETF. You wait for a spot ETF or you just, buy it on
Yeah.
Coinbase or, whatever. But
Yeah.
yeah, but so what my point is that there's a lot of people in my audience that are a little like, all right, they call the couple of guys call Bitcoin Bartle do coin or something. Have you ever heard this?
No.
I think it's kind of funny. I mean, it's a funny thing, Bartle do, but they slam it for being old technology or dated or it's like, and the hit is like technology moves forward, folks. Like, why are we going to hold on to this antiquated technology? And I push back for a couple of things. Well, for one, the simplicity of Bitcoin is a positive, not a negative. The fact that it's lasted for so long proves something that you should actually pay attention to because some new thing hasn't been battle tested for so long, right?
Yeah.
So these are the things that what do you say to somebody that says like Bitcoin's going to die and quantum computers are going to shut it down and you're thwarting progress.
Yeah, no, I definitely don't agree. And I think that we shouldn't fix something that isn't broke. I mean, I I love the fact that Bitcoin has shown so much resiliency and basically turned into this bomb-proof computer network distributed around the whole world that
Mhm.
I mean, good luck trying to recreate it. There are basically 17,000 versions trying to be as big as Bitcoin, and none of them succeed because network effect is really, really
Yeah.
powerful. And what I
Yeah.
would say honestly is I really like to equate, at least in my head, Bitcoin to the early days of the internet. And
Mhm.
there were certain protocols that came out when it came to email. And like, you can't just rewire the whole system. You can't just like all of a sudden say, well, you know what? I came out with a better version of email and everyone just come on mine. Like, okay, good luck. Like, you could do that. You could totally do
Yeah.
that and try to convince the world to get on that or try to convince the world, not to be on Google or not to be on whatever. But that's going to be very, very challenging because once something works and it takes off and everyone's sort of on board, like, it reaches dominance, and that's sort of what
Yeah.
happened to Bitcoin. I mean, there's that great book, it's the Internet of Money. I see Bitcoin as the Internet of Money, and you can build a bunch of things on other layers, and you could create websites and tech companies and all that, and I think we're going to see that. But on the fundamental layer, I think that under infrastructure, especially when it comes to our financial system, will be Bitcoin. And I envision a world, I hope for a world where we do see more countries adopted as global reserve currency. It's the only institutional grade or reserve currency grade technology right now, Bitcoin is. And I think that with the Lightning Network, it inspires a lot of hope that it will be scalable. We are
Right.
not at a point right now, any Bitcoiner will tell you, we are not at a point where Lightning is scalable enough to handle all the transactions that are in, the mainstream use of money. But it's growing. It's growing. That's where a lot of investment is pouring in. That's where venture capital that's interested in Bitcoin is going to help things like Taro and just allowing Lightning to grow as quickly as possible to bring in more retailers to allow people to pay with Bitcoin and use it as a payment rail as opposed to just a store of value. And I think that's really important, especially in developing nations where people use it more as a transactional, as a medium of exchange, as opposed to a store of value because they really aren't able to save. So
Yeah.
I think it's going to grow. I just disagree. I think that people are not really, they're not studying and appreciating what Bitcoin offers as much as they should. And there will be other things that I think try to surface, but nothing that has the power and the potential of Bitcoin.
I agree. I agree. I mean, and my position is always that Bitcoin should be and will be at the top of,
Yeah.
coin market cap or, whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, not that that's the most important, but I mean, I think if we're all not lying, we like,
Yeah.
whatever you're invested in, you'd like it to be up on that list, I'm sure.
Of course.
So, just to kind of wind down, you mentioned the metaverse earlier, and look, in NFTs and ownership of digital assets and this whole world. What do you see where we're headed as we kind of embody the internet more and the games and do you believe that that needs to be on blockchain and decentralized and all of that? Are you just not all that concerned about it? You're more concerned about the monetary effects of Bitcoin, and that's not really that interesting to you.
I'm going to be totally honest with you. I know it's going to happen. I know we're moving in the direction of this metaverse world, but I really dread what that looks like. I don't have kids yet, but that is a goal of mine. I want to have a family, and I am so grateful that I didn't grow up with this stuff. I'm grateful that I went outside and like I played games and sports, and I watched, old school movies where technology didn't ruin the plot line. And like,
Yeah.
I don't like the idea of a world where my child has a device from the moment that they can walk, and that they're entering into like this virtual world as opposed to appreciating the beautiful physical one around. And so I think that probably ages me, right? Like I'm an old soul. I'm a traditional person. I want us to get back to a sense of like family values and community. And I think Bitcoin actually can help us do that. But the direction we're heading in, like, it scares me because I think of the movie WALL-E and like that spaceship where all the people are like just sitting in their seats and they have their VR cameras on, and they're like, eating and getting really fat, and they like just exist in this like fake world. And I don't know. I personally am not passionate about the metaverse or buying fake, like fake houses and fake clothes for my fake version of myself. Like, I don't like it, and I'm sorry to your audience that loves it, but like, it's not for me. I love the real world. Like,
I get it. No,
I'm
on. I do have children, and it is already a task to keep them off of their iPads and not watching TV and going outside. So imagining this world where games become, or just like school or meetings or going to a concert, like my goal is going to be to focus on going for hikes, going outside, doing real things. But I agree with you that it is inevitable, and ownership and all that. We just don't want Facebook to be in charge of it. I know that for a fact. I think that's important. But so I guess, look, I was going to say something when you were talking about, I was going to add, when you were talking about Lightning Network, just to throw it back to, because apparently I'm some like evangelist for Algorand, which I've stumbled into. But, in El Salvador, I believe that most of the banks are moving Bitcoin using Algorand. I know Lightning Network is what most of the people are using, but, the banks use Algorand to move their Bitcoin. So, I think my personal, 2 cents is that maybe Algorand can help scale Bitcoin. But I know that the people there's a lot of pushback on that idea. But I like the idea of Algorand helping, good old grandpa across the street. All right. You're like, what, dude? Okay. Natalie, thank you so much. Is there anything else? What are you excited about right now? What are you looking forward to? And, what's next for you? Do you think that there's a little bit of a recovery in the market? Are you hopeful, or are you thinking, oh, this is just a fake out and all of that?
It'll be interesting to see. Everything is keeping me on my toes right now, right? Like last year, 2021, everything seemed to only go up, and now things are only going down. So I think, like I mentioned
Yeah.
before, I think there's going to be some more short-term pain. I've been buying. I am accumulating. It's funny. Whenever I buy, it dips even lower. So if it does dip,
So
you could probably blame me and assume I
blame it
bought a
on
little
you.
bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, but no, in the long run, I'm bullish. Like again, like you just have to kind of zoom out and know that this is I'm in it for the long run for this hopefully revolutionizing our current system and making things a little bit better, making things a little bit more accessible and fair. And I'm just really grateful for the way my career is going. I'm just trying to do my best. I'm headed to a conference in an hour in Las Vegas to speak about investing and Bitcoin. The other speakers are Rod and Damon John from Shark Tank and like Greg
Look at
Foss.
you.
And so I sit there and I'm like, how has this happened? And I
This
don't
is
know, but I'm
amazing.
grateful. So yeah. And if you guys want to reach out to me, I have this podcast, Coin Stories. You can hit me up on
Yeah.
Twitter at Nat Brunell. And you can also visit my website, talkingbitcoin.com. And I just appreciate the chance to be on your show.
Of course. And so we'll end it with this. So I think it's obvious who Satoshi is, but I'm curious, do you have an opinion? Okay, I'll tell you who I think it is. I'll tell you who I think it is, and then I'll let you. So I think it's pretty clear it's Nick Szabo. But okay, so who do you think Satoshi is?
If I absolutely had to guess, I think it was Hal Finney. But I like the fact that we don't know. I think there's a lot of providence in that, and so I'm glad that we don't know who Satoshi is.
Yeah, I think it's Nick Szabo and Hal Finney. That's always been who I think they're friends. Okay, all right. Well, thank you so much, Natalie, and have a great time in Vegas. And I
Thank
really
you.
genuinely appreciate you taking the time. Okay,
Thanks
bye.
so much. I wish you luck with the show. Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.